You didn't know that you needed to change your design plan just because the FDA came up with a new guidance document. And it's only a draft, but you really do need to think about changing your design plan. Even if you're only developing software as a medical device. Yeah, 62304 didn't change. None of the final guidance documents have changed, but there's a draft guidance that's going to be approved by the FDA as a final guidance document. And by the time you get ready to submit your 510K, all the work will be required in your 510K submission. In that of your submission in that section. Section 16, the section for software validation, that's going to double in length in what you have to submit. The reason why? One thing, testing. The draft guidance document for 2018 mentioned testing. It had 8 different bullets under the section of testing, but it didn't give really any details. Just recently, the FDA came up with a new draft guidance, 2022 cybersecurity documentation guidance for a 510K submission. And in there, they go in length for 2-3 pages about what testing is required for cybersecurity. So therefore, if you only plan on doing a risk analysis and explaining what you plan on doing to address cybersecurity or what risk controls you've identified to address the cybersecurity risk, that won't be enough. Now you're actually going to have to do cybersecurity testing and show your results in a report that meet the requirements. That's going to be required. So when you go back to your design plan, that's where we normally put in, well, what is the verification testing we're going to need to do? Well, the FDA gives you some options. Number 1, we'd like to see vulnerability testing, robustness testing, boundary analysis testing, penetration testing. All those tests, they're expecting to get results from your testing in the form of a report. They're also looking for who did this testing, what are their qualifications for doing that testing of the team that actually developed the software. Because how can you really do any kind of penetration testing if you're the one that wrote the code? You need somebody that doesn't know the ins and outs of your software, that didn't get involved in the development of the software. They can actually see, can I penetrate this as a hacker? So that's what you're going to have to include in your design plan. And there are a couple of places where you need to look at it. Normally, I look at 5 different phases of a design plan. The first one is the planning phase, right at the beginning. So we identify what additional steps are going to have to be done. Number 1 of those, you might have in your design inputs, we have this new guidance document specifying different types of cybersecurity testing we want. So you might want to add that as a design input. Number 2, you might want to think of specific types of screening tests that you might do during the development to make sure that there aren't any problems, vulnerabilities that you've accidentally included in the scope of your software code that you've written. Then once you've done your design freeze and said, this is it, we're done developing this software and it compiles properly, now we're going to get into the verification and validation testing of that software. Well, now you're going to have to do that cybersecurity testing. So vulnerability testing, robustness testing, boundary analysis, penetration testing, all those tests are going to need to be done. You're going to need a protocol for each of those. Some of those could be automated. Some of them will have to be manual. You might do a mixture of automated and manual testing. You're going to have to identify a supplier, qualify that supplier, have a supplier quality agreement, come up with a proposal from that supplier, agree on it, give them a purchase order, give them access to all your system, and have them do the testing and come up with a report, which you're going to have to review and accept. And then you can submit that as part of your 510K to the FDA. And that's assuming they find nothing wrong. Any bugs that they find, any vulnerabilities that they find, they're going to put that in the report. Now you have to implement corrective actions for each of those. And it's going to be very unlikely the FDA is going to say, oh, no, that's okay. You don't have to fix those now. Just launch it with those cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Just tell everybody about them and don't do anything right now. That's not going to happen. you're going to have to implement corrective actions. So it's sort of like you failed your biocompatibility testing and have to go redesign your materials. Now we're developing software as a medical device. We failed our cybersecurity testing. We have to go back and update our code. And we have to repeat all our validation testing that we just did because we changed the code again. Hopefully, the cybersecurity vulnerabilities are very small. Otherwise, that could be a lot of work. Hopefully, we can maybe do some sort of regression analysis, and we're only going to have to do certain retesting on our verification and validation of the software. But if we're unlucky and we have to do a major change or multiple major changes, we may have to redo all the testing for that performance, for the actual unit testing, the integration testing, the total system testing. All that might need to be redone just because you found cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So you might want to start that earlier than you planned or have a longer timeline for your schedule. So to summarize, the things that you're going to have to think about here, you're going to figure out which of these tests you're going to need to do. So I'll list them one more time, and they're actually in the cybersecurity guidance document. I think it's pages 22 through 24 of the 2022 draft cybersecurity guidance document from the FDA. And I'll put a link down below. But we published a blog a couple of weeks ago about this. So it's vulnerability testing. That's a test that often would be automated. You'd look at internal testing, external testing, and environmental testing. Then you'd have robustness testing. This is where you have some sort of fault you put in the system and see what the effect is. Can the system recover or not? Does it give you an error message, or does it cause the whole system to fall apart, and now it becomes vulnerable to somebody either shutting the system down, or now they can actually access the system in a way that you didn't want them to. A boundary analysis. Sometimes with boundary analysis, you're putting in minimums or maximums into variables that you input into the software, or you'll put them right up outside those limits. So if it can only be a character of this length, you'll either go a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. You might put it, it depends on what the variables that you are putting into your software, but you're checking the boundaries of what that software is allowed to accept and seeing how that can affect it. And that could potentially be an automated test, but normally that would be more of a manual test. And the only time it would be automated is if you were doing it as part of regression testing. So you have a standard set of values that you're going to put in the system to make sure it still functions properly. The penetration testing is almost always manual testing that your company is going to do. And it's not actually your company, it's going to be somebody that wasn't on the development team. So unless you're a very large company, and most of our clients are not large companies, and they're developing their first medical device that software is a medical device, they've never done this before. So they're going to have to go out and hire an outside firm to do penetration testing. Of course, it's a company that's going to be qualified to do this. They're going to have to document the credentials of that company, and you have to produce a report that meets the FDA's acceptance criteria. Now, we have a guidance document from the FDA on what's supposed to be in non-clinical testing reports, but that's probably going to have to be adapted quite a bit for something that's software testing and cybersecurity testing. So there are going to be some things in there that you have to adjust for, because what is going to be your statistical sampling size for software? Typically, you only test once for each case. So you can list all your cases and test each one. If you had different operating systems, different testing environments, you might test each of those, but it's still an N of 1. So you're not going to have a statistical analysis of that. And at the very end of our design plans, when we're going through the design transfer process, one of the things that we usually try to get our clients to include is a post-market surveillance plan. Now, the FDA does have a post-market management of cybersecurity guidance document where they ask you to define what is going to be your post-market surveillance plan for cybersecurity. They want you to actually register for some of the databases that disclose vulnerabilities that have been identified for the off-the-shelf software that you're incorporating in your system, such as if you're using an operating system like Android or iOS or Windows. If it's going to be used in a cloud using some sort of a browser, all of those cases would have these databases that you can log into and become a member of and get reports of, oh, we've identified this new vulnerability. But you should also be coming up with a plan for your retesting of all of the cybersecurity vulnerabilities for your software. So you don't just do all those tests that I listed once and be done with it. You have to repeat them frequently. And unlike physical devices where you only have to do a retest when you make a change, in the world of cybersecurity, you have to constantly retest because hackers are constantly changing. They're changing their techniques. The operating environment that you're going to work in is going to change. Off-the-shelf software is going to change. So if there's any changes in the software that's being used, the operating environment that's being used, or the approaches that hackers are using, you're going to have to retest. So you might have a regular frequency that's defined, and then you might do additional testing above and beyond that when you become aware of the need to do some testing. So you might do it for a case-specific vulnerability that was identified. We have this particular type of vulnerability that's been identified by hackers, and they're going after code and they're looking for it all over the internet. And if they find it, you need to do your own penetration test and looking specifically because you know you have it in your software, and see if the risk controls you put in place are adequate. So this is a significant amount of work that you're going to have to do. You need to add all these tests to your design plan. You have to allow for having to retest after you fix any bugs or vulnerabilities that are found. You have to generate those reports, and you're going to have to add these new suppliers to your supplier quality system, and you're going to have to come up with a plan that has detailed retesting plans as part of post-market surveillance. And all of that has to be part of your design plan. And people just aren't thinking like that. They're thinking, oh, cybersecurity, that's just a document where I document my cybersecurity risks and the risk controls we put in place. Now they're forcing us at the FDA to actually provide testing reports showing that the risk controls you put in place are adequate. And that's a total game changer for everybody in terms of how much documentation they're going to have to do. It changes your design plan, and companies are going to have setbacks. Don't be surprised by this. Count on it. You're going to have delays. So what are you going to do about it? When is that going to be on the schedule? Push up as much of that testing as you can early on in the process. Any kind of automated tests that you can do those early. Any kind of manual tests, plan for when those are going to be done, and get everything set up with those vendors ahead of time before you need it. And they can even let you know, these are the things we find most often, so you can plan those as part of your design process. We're going to look for these weaknesses and make sure we don't include them in our software before we even hand it to the people that are going to do penetration testing. I hope this is helpful to you, gives you an update of, this isn't just another guidance document and another paperwork exercise that the FDA is making you go through. Now they're actually giving cybersecurity some teeth. They're actually requiring us to do testing, show that our vendors that are doing the work are qualified, and show that they're independent, and they're asking us to do this on a regular basis to make sure that our software maintains its security. And that's something we've done, not just for software as a medical device, it's for any device that can be attacked, has some sort of connectivity. So you're going to have devices that are software in a medical device. You're going to have devices with firmware. You're going to have devices with monitoring capability. All these things, any kind of wireless functionality, any SD cards, any memory that's included in the device, all of these things are going to be vulnerability points that can be attacked. I hope this is helpful to you. And if you have any suggestions down below for how your company is attacking this, or questions on how do we handle this, please put it in the comments below, or shoot me an email. My contact information is on the community page, as well as on our and it's also on our website, medicaldeviceacademy.com. Thank you, and hope this was helpful. Bye-bye.